Hello and welcome again to the Big Marketing Show. I'm your host, Malcolm Auld, and in this season's final episode, we're examining the rise of retail media and what brands need to know to make it work for them. We've got two really good expert guests today. Firstly, Lachlan Brahe, who is the chair of the Australian Retail Media Council and also General Manager of Retail Media at Cash Rewards. Welcome, Lachlan.
Thanks for having me, Mal.
Good to see you. And so people understand Lachlan's role, he's in fact involved in selling retail media, so he's one side of that coin. The other side joining him is Leah Jackson, who's the Group Director for Commerce Strategy at Group M, one of the world's largest and leading media investment brands. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this.
Oh, it's good to have you both. And Leah, obviously working with a media agency, buys retail media, so we have both sides of the coin, and neither are shy either, so I'm looking forward to today's show. Retail media has come a long way since I ran Shell's retail media campaigns, known then as Petro Convenience, I think. It consisted of TV, radio, catalogues, pump counters, point of sale advertising, all funded by the brands that were on sale at the time. Given you're the chair of the Industry Council, Lachlan, how would you define retail media for our audience?
Look, I think the simple version of that is that you are now seeing retailers becoming publishers. You know, they've got physical assets, they've got digital assets, and they're able to create advertising inventory across those. When you start to unpack that a bit further, there's three core elements that I guess define a retail media network. The first being those assets, the second being rich audience data. So retailers generally know a lot about their customers. And the third component to that, which really differentiates retail media from traditional media, is that because the retailer is also the point of transaction or fulfillment, there is a direct linkage between media investment to a sales result. So particularly from a digital channel, see an ad, click on an ad, buy a product, you can look at the investment made in that advertising relative to the sales results that you get and have that closed loop of attribution, which a lot of marketers obviously find a very satisfying way to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leah, what would you like to add to that?
Oh, I think Lockie did a pretty good job in summarising retail media. I think one of the things we're seeing emerge is not just retailers playing in this space, but any business that has a large pool of good quality first-party data is looking at how they can use that across the media landscape. Mm-hmm. We're seeing what I would define probably more like owned media networks. I think CommBank came out last week talking about their owned media asset. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, in the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more of these owned media players come into this space as well.
Okay. Well, we've got some visuals to show today, folks. Leah, can you explain the difference between what is on-site and off-site retail media? And we've got some examples to show after you go through this explanation.
Sure, of course. So I think retail media can largely be broken down into three areas, actually. There's in-store, so the things that happen within a physical environment, if a retailer has a physical environment. There's on-site, so media formats that operate or come to life across owned assets, owned digital assets like websites and apps. Largely those things may be sponsored products, they may be single tiles, display banners, etc. And then you have off-network, which is where media partners or retailers are using their rich first-party data and they are taking that data outside of their ecosystem into the general media ecosystem and allowing brands to be able to then, you know, ad serve through the full programmatic channel mix.
Okay, so we've got some examples just to have a look at those. We'll just quickly have a go through those now. There's some in-store examples and some out-of-store examples. So do you want to just take us through these?
In-store screens are probably one of the most talked about formats of retail media. There is a catch cry in the industry that, you know, you aren't a true retail media network unless you have screens of some description. Mm-hmm. Don't know whether that's true or not, but that's definitely kind of a sentiment. So what you're seeing on screen are things like digital screens on trolleys, at the point of purchase, touch screens in store.
Right. And that's in the physical sense. We've also got others that are online.
Yeah, so what you can see here are examples of sponsored products. So in the same way that Google search exists, there are, brands have the ability to bid for placements and for ranking within the online environments for retailers using third-party software. And then you also have the out-of-store screens as well, great example there, which is where you're able to capture people as they're entering that store environment to really drive mental salience.
Okay, and we've got some out-of-store examples as well, I think, to have a look at.
Yeah, so this is a great snapshot of off-site media. And what I think this does is really brings to life the depth and breadth of what those offerings start to look like. And they're pretty sophisticated. It's not just YouTube, it's not just, programmatic digital out of home. We're talking about the ability to reach audiences across most traditional media formats, really underpinned by that rich, good quality data that many of these retailers sit on. And the reason it's such good quality data is the frequency of transaction and the frequency that retailers are able to maintain or update those records, which show varying preference, people shifting in and out of their purchasing behaviors, up trading, down trading, cross trading, etc., which is something that brands often don't have a lot of. And certainly not to the depth and the size and the scale that you need to be able to use it fully as part of your total media buy.
Okay. And I think we've got a couple of examples of those too, haven't we, of the offsite? Yeah.
These are some great examples of, where a retailer has allowed a brand to target off network across YouTube. So what you can see is not just the ability to use a 6-second, bumper, for example, but also that shoppable product catalog down the side.
Yep.
And then another example here is Spotify, where a brand has been able to obviously have audio ads play through the mixes that someone might be listening to, as well as being ad served on the app as well.
And we have another one.
Mal, I'm probably dating myself as much as your Shell example dated you.
Yep.
But this is what we've talked about as a marketing industry, and particularly a digital marketing industry, for probably 25 years. Like, wouldn't it be great if we had this rich audience data that enabled us to do more than target on interest or context or behavior, and put a little bit more meat around our planning principles that resolve to an actual outcome that is kind of the objective of the campaign in the first place. And lo and behold, retailers have had that data for decades, just locked away in legacy systems that have meant it's not particularly actionable. And it's probably owing to the advent of e-commerce, in the sort of 2006-7 era onwards, that those systems have now sort of more come to the fore of how retailers are enhancing the customer experience online, and are now starting to see the additional benefits of monetization of that data through a channel like retail media.
Yeah,
and social might play an even bigger role than we probably give it. Like we probably give it credit for, especially around the segmentation, profiling, and targeting. Access through social platforms. It's become very common for marketers to look at things that way. And so when you can actually create audiences that are based on buying behaviors or an intent to purchase, it becomes really, really powerful.
And it's that whole understanding, as we now call it, first-party data. I used to call it customer data. I worked on Peter Shepherd's shoes, and every year they would send out a mail order catalogue. And what he would do was he would use the mail order catalogue to test products for the upcoming season, and based on the sales from the mail order catalogue, he then merchandised his store with the best sellers according to what was sold through the mail order catalogue. So it's same stuff, just different technology in many ways.
It's exactly the same, actually, Malcolm. It's probably just taken it from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. I should also just add, retail media is still largely underpinned by all of those formats that you mentioned, that you were working with at Shell. Yes, it's become very sophisticated, but there is still a significant amount of investment into physical assets that exist within the store environments, and they really work. So, I think what's kind of transpired is that it's expanded. It probably hasn't completely shifted away from those physical in-store assets either.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. So, Lachlan, you generously shared some of the research from IAB, which they did this year on retail media, and we got some visuals to talk to. So this first one is suggesting that retail media is obviously growing. What are the reasons behind that?
Look, there's a few that I'm happy to talk to. The first of which is it's obviously working for people. That's going to kind of underpin the growth of any channel. Like I sort of described before, you've got this closed loop of attribution where you can very conveniently say, I can represent my media investment by actual sales and measure the buzzword for that at the moment being ROAS, or return on ad spend. Now, I'm not necessarily going to advocate that that's the best way to measure, but to certainly have that closed loop of attribution to justify marketing kind of looks good at the C-suite level. I think it's also increasing because there's just a lot more of it in Australia. Like if you think back, I mean, we're a relatively small market, right? But when you sort of think back over the last 4 years, we've probably grown from like maybe 3 retail media networks to close to about a dozen now. And as Leah described, we've sort of moved from just the retail side to more, owned media or commerce media networks, with CommBank coming on. Obviously, with Cash Rewards, we're a retail media network, but we're not necessarily a retailer per se. So you've just got more market. I think the other reason why this is growing is more on the intra level. You've got suppliers and brands in Australia that have traded with retailers for literally decades through their trade relationships. And retail media is just kind of a new extension and manifestation of that. There's different parameters for planning. There's different, I guess, nature of investment changes as a result on that. The accountability levels change. But, nonetheless, you're building on sort of decades of relationships with, new technology and new formats.
And as you said, it's the relationships have been there for a long time, particularly in retail with suppliers, as you know, and they're just leveraging in new ways. And Leah, what are you seeing in terms of growth?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Lockie said. I think what's also transpiring is the management of what has typically been known as trade spend is moving from sitting with the sales team into marketing and media teams. What that then is doing is allowing marketers who specialize in this area to be able to look for opportunities, and that's bringing more budget in because they are able to, double down on investments in formats which may be driving conversion or creating consideration closer to the point of purchase. I think the other thing too is some of the numbers may just be the reporting of these large pools of budget that have typically sat within sales functions or tied to commercial relationships. And that's now starting to be reported as part of media spend because there's a new level of scrutiny around how that money is being deployed and what it's actually bringing back for a business.
Yeah, that's really good insight because it's always been there. Maybe it just hasn't been on that reporting line because it was in a different area. So that leads to us, where is the budget coming from? Are we creating new budgets or is it out of existing budgets that are there, they're just being shifted? Lachlan?
Wouldn't it be nice if it was all new? The majority at this stage is really coming through from existing media channels. So you can look at a breakdown in some of the IAB research that the Retail Media Council did. You're getting the lion's share coming out of traditional media channels. If you look at areas like social media and search, you're seeing a lot of money shift over. And to dial in on search for a moment, 2 or 3 years ago, you kind of had the scenario where a retailer and a brand were competing for exactly the same keywords, driving each other's price up to drive a customer to a retailer's environment to purchase that brand in the first place. It seems kind of odd to... Anyway, so that's probably why there's a bit of a shift, I guess, on that more kind of direct response level in search. But look, there's still around 40% is new money coming into the market in retail media. I would apportion some of this to smaller brands who generally are not as active in consumer marketing as some of their bigger competitors, right? So a lot of what they're doing is primarily through their trade relationships. So because retail media is now giving, I guess, that new extension and expansion to trade, we're starting to see money flow from other sources other than media investment into bolstering up the retail media spend.
That's interesting. New players in the market that weren't necessarily being measured before. What are you seeing, Leah, with your clients?
I would absolutely concur with what Lockie's saying, particularly around smaller brands. the power of retail media networks is they can really deliver a full funnel campaign. Like we started, you can shop at the shelf, whether that be the digital or the physical, to get your product, your messaging, etc., in front of the right consumer. Equally, you can do an amplification job through their off-network channels. So if you're a brand that only has, a small pool of budget, then it's going to be more efficient and more effective to pull that across one media partner, but have that deployed across their multiple channels.
Right.
Equally, we've all seen the stats around the declines in linear television. That is being moved into digital television. People are certainly still watching. They're just watching across different channels and different apps and streaming services, etc. And so the utilization of data and the off-network activity is enabling brands to take what might have been put into linear television and connect with a rich, high-value audience across some of those streaming platforms, but underpinned by the retail data.
Right.
We're a big screens buying nation. We love an out-of-home screen. And there have been acquisitions that have been made by retailers, particularly in the screen space, which is where we're also seeing spend start to shift towards, because they afford proximity to store. They're reinforcing a brand's message as somebody's walking into that store environment. So you're capturing them in what's been largely referred to as the last 3 feet.
Yeah.
Those things are really starting to see the shift of spend out of, traditional channels.
Okay. Then
I think, Leah, to your point there, reach is relative, right? You kind of can't talk about a reach campaign as like absolute. Reach to a small challenger brand in category is ideally people in that category who aren't aware of their product. And if you can reach them, you're generating the new awareness that you're wanting in the area that you kind of need it the most, right? You're not trying to introduce new people to category or anything too complicated like that. And I think if there's a message for retail media, it is that that's what the whole retail media can build brands. It can generate awareness. It can do these things because it's all relative to your position in market.
Yeah, I would agree, Lach. And I think, there's been long this fight. We've created this fight between performance marketing and brand marketing, but actually advertising should do both. And I think retail media channels and formats, and when creative is applied really well to those, can actually do that job better than other formats can.
Yeah, it's funny how it's the same fight, just different words. It used to be direct response and brand, or above the line, below the line, through the line. We love our jargon. Now it's performance. It's crazy. Now, our next visual talks about clients being the major influencer in this move. Leah, is that your experience?
Definitely. I mean, having just entered the agency space, coming off the back of 10 years of being a client, I know that clients are the ones that are agitating for how they are showing up through retail media networks. It's either because they've become more involved in the planning of trade spend, and with that comes a pressure and a level of accountability, or they also understand the value of the data that's available to tap into and want to move budgets towards retail media. But, there is still that level of attribution and reporting that's probably not quite there. From an agency perspective, we are also being brought into the conversation because we're media agnostic. We, look at the full media landscape and we plan according to what's going to deliver the best possible result to a client's brief. And with that, we're able to apply our smarts and expertise and experience around retail media and where it should sit on the plans and what the right level of investment would look like through retail media networks versus traditional channels, because there is a role for both. Equally, it's our job where it makes sense to be hyper efficient with budget to pitch to our clients or present to our clients the option of consolidating between one or with one particular player or one or two.
And Lachlan, are you seeing that with
I think there's also
Yeah, Lachlan, are you seeing the same?
I was just going to say, I think there's also a practical lens on this of a role for retail media in just considering retail media networks still as walled gardens, because, retailers have every right to that kind of claim. And the level of investment, the way that you spend across retail media networks can often just be predicated on distribution, ranging. So you might have a portfolio of products that's ranged differently between 2 or 3 different retailers that you work with. That's obviously going to influence the way you spend with them for retail media to promote said products. It also could be an incentive to the ones where you're not ranged nationally to invest more to sort of test out their audiences or test out their customer base and their markets to encourage more broader national ranging decisions as well. So there's some purely commercial aspects to this too.
Then does it, just to that point, you talk about national, are you finding more of the clients are national based advertisers, or does retail offer a really good local opportunity for maybe advertisers who couldn't have done that before? Either of you?
It's honestly, it's a bit of both. I think you've got and I guess this is where retail media's rich data has been the real step up on trade. So if you take a traditional trade execution, like a physical catalog, for example, you generally don't get catalogs printed at much more than state level. Yeah. So there'd be state level pricing, state level ranging, etc. If you're anything under that, you might not be eligible to be part of that type of promotion. Yeah. Whereas because retail media can literally be targeted, taking Leah's in-store screen example before, you could target just the stores where your product is ranged. So that makes for a local opportunity. And again, sort of looping back to the point of, where the money's coming from, this is the entry point for smaller brands who don't have, that wide ranging distribution to still participate and still get a result out of it, just relative to, how big they are or how big they're trying to grow.
And Leah, does small local suit an agency like yours? Because obviously you're playing with big players. Do you find you're getting some small inquiries from smaller businesses?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the size of business is dictating the conversations that we're having. I think everybody's got a keen interest. I think actually some of the smaller businesses that we work with and some of the smaller brands that I've definitely worked with in the past are probably more of take more of a challenger mindset. And so they're not thinking necessarily in, mass media and large scale activity because the budgets just don't support that. And so, they want to be hyper efficient with those budgets. And I think that's probably the thing that underpins all of this. Brands and businesses are feeling the pinch of the inflationary, environments that we're operating in. And so in the past, it might have been okay to have a degree of wastage within your media, and that's just a by the by. But I think there's an understanding now from, the C-suite down to, the marketing teams, down to sales teams, etc., that understand that you can create greater quality reach and reduce that wastage as well. And I think that's probably what most of the brands that I've worked with are looking at, how to create greater effectiveness and efficiency from their total overall commitments, as opposed to just, blasting out and hoping that the right people are going to see the right message.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well then, let's move on to this next visual, which is about the media being used is more at point of sale than at pre-purchase. Is that correct, or is it better off trying to get people before they get to the store? What's working best? Lachlan?
Look, I think it's a combination of everything. Like we've kind of laboured the point that retail media can do, can serve any marketing objectives if you're using the right formats for it. If you're trying to, shape a particular seasonal type of spend, then obviously putting great big ads in the front of the store is a way to generate awareness and consideration for that particular product at a particular time of the year. It serves its purpose, right? Something like a sponsored product link on an e-commerce website might do more to elevate a challenger brand to the top of its category, or it might be the type of thing that a leading brand buys anyway, just to solidify their dominance at the top of the category. Right. So I kind of think it can do whatever it's set up for, provided you're kind of clear on the messaging, the target audience that you're actually trying to reach, where they are within the cycle of, understanding your product, being part of your category, an occasionalist in it, a loyalist in it, just understanding all of these parameters to make sure you're planning retail media the same way you'd plan any other media channel. And maybe that's the disconnect that people see between how they used to invest trade versus how they are now investing in retail media, and why this is becoming more of a marketing discipline than a sales discipline.
Yeah, and Leah, your clients using it at point of sale or beforehand, or a combination, I assume?
It's definitely a combination. Personally, I am a massive fan of retail media at the point of purchase. I think there are so many choices that get made when you're standing in front of a wall of product. I'm talking about the bricks and mortar environment, the physical store environment. You know, you just need to walk into a department store and see racks of jumpers in winter to, you know, be overwhelmed and confused by choice. And so I think retail media formats can really help to direct consumers to something that they may not have considered, or reinforce the value proposition of a product. However, if you're the owner of a product that requires some education, then using retail media before people get to the point of purchase is fantastic to connect. You know, I come from the world of cake mix and sugar, and you know, that's what I was selling in my last role. And you know, we had specialty sugars that we were trying to explain to people how to use, but sometimes you just need to show that being applied. You need to show that going into a recipe, or show that going into exactly. That's exactly right. And then if you can shortcut the point, like the path to purchase, if you can then put a shoppable asset over the top of that, or it's a direct click through directly to the product, then that's a great way for consumers to be able to add your product to the cart.
Okay. Well, someone's obviously...
Yeah, I'd go the opposite example in terms of the pre-shop. I'm coming from a world, in my last retail media role, of alcohol. So I'm old enough to remember when the tequila section was the bottle with the sombrero on the top of it, right? That's now the agave liquor section.
Yeah. I think it's still there, Locke. I'm pretty sure it's still there.
It is. Excellent. Good to know. But as that's now the agave liquor section, there is so much choice. So the pre of retail media helps people with their initial research. So you can walk in as an informed customer and not kind of stand in front of an enormous shelf going, I don't even really know where to start with this. So I think there's a dual role.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the exciting thing of that, though, Locke, is, you know, the off-network opportunity allows you to use video. So it's not just, here's my 3 RTB or reasons to believe on an asset, and it's just written out. You can actually bring it to life in, you know, really rich content, creator content or advertorial, whichever you choose, which is then obviously helping consumers to I guess, consider your product or consider your brand before they, or you know, before they get into store.
I suppose as our next visual says, the main objective from retail media is still to increase sales. Correct? That's the research showed that, Lachlan.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's all kind of leading to this point. What I find interesting when we undertook this part of the research was we're looking at measuring an increase of sales, and we're looking at acquiring new customers. We're still talking for return on ad spend though. So I'm kind of looking at these two and thinking, well, that's a measure of growth and incrementality versus a ratio that's pointing towards effective advertising as opposed to just the growth aspect. So I think there's a lot of work and education to do around that as well.
Okay. So what are the categories of the major users and why? Obviously FMCG is a big one, but you know, the research showed a range of categories, but Leah, what are you seeing as being the big users?
I mean, I think this chart does a great job of reflecting the language and the conversations that we're having, particularly around FMCG. You know, there are 2 very, very big retail media networks that have really built the industry, I think, in this country, particularly across, you know, Woolworths and Coles.
Yes.
And so I think that's definitely driven the conversation, but the growth in other categories is coming because those retailers, or the retailers that service those categories, are building out their retail media offerings. You know, you've got Chemist Warehouse, you've got Mixed In by Endeavour, which covers the alcohol industry, alongside Coles Liquor, Coles 360 Liquor. We're definitely starting to see other retailers that operate in auto, operate in you know, office supplies, etc., starting to look at what their retail media offerings, you know, is going to how that's going to work. And so what we're seeing are those brands that have commitments to those businesses starting to think about how they're best utilising all of their spend.
Yep. And for our international viewers, Woolworths and Coles are our 2 largest supermarket chains. They own about 70% of the market. Very wealthy businesses. Lachlan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is probably one of the first times, I guess, in the media landscape where you have such a direct connection between the growth of the publisher, if you like, and relative to its audience.
Right.
You know, I don't think newspapers necessarily start by saying we're going to start publishing content about X because we're going to get automotive advertisers or confectionery advertisers.
Good insight.
Whereas clearly that's sort of fundamental to the growth of a retail media network. I did some consultancy work a couple of years ago with a plumbing supply business who were saying, we're going to start a retail media network. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure what kind of budgets like Caroma and, you know, bathroom fittings companies are likely to have, but the way that conversation was steered was more into you really capture the tradie market between 6 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Okay, so there's an audience. It might not be the one you think, and it certainly might not be the advertisers you think, but that's an audience that's probably interested in, I don't know, the new Isuzu work ute, MYOB, any kind of stuff to support sole traders and small business owners, payday loans, personal loans, you name it. Just got them sort of thinking outside the directness of their category. But I guess it goes to show, if you've got rich first-party data and you understand the application of that to different audiences, there's potential for some kind of retail or commerce media offering.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point to make too, Locke, because, you know, so often we talk about what's referred to as endemic suppliers. They are, you know, the brands that often answer these questionnaires have a vested interest because their products are on the shelves. But what we're also seeing too in the conversations we have is that brands that aren't endemic suppliers are definitely looking at retail media. You know, I sat in a really great panel last week presented by Land Rover, who have done a collaboration or are working very closely with David Jones Amplify, their retail media offering. And it's because, you know, as a lifestyle adjacent product to the types of products that David Jones stock, it makes sense that those two brands would come together. So even though you can't physically buy a Land Rover from the front window of David Jones, they are still showing up there because it's an opportunity to reach the right audience that they're trying to engage with.
That reminds me, Leah, because I've worked on more automotive accounts than I can remember, but last century we used to get the dealers to have their service staff, as soon as a vehicle was dropped in for service, to record on the database what radio station they were listening to in the car. And that helped us target our radio advertising based on what channel was on in the vehicle. But of course, these days with Spotify and other apps, it's not as easy to do. So anyway, moving on.
No, you can do it. Just do it programmatically. Just automatically. It automatically works.
We'll try it. So is retail media more suitable for physical store or online stores, or both? Like, is there a divide between the two, or is it equal? Leah?
Look, I think it's really important that you're considering the role of both. I think for many FMCG brands, your products exist within the physical space, and there's still broadly speaking, 80% of sales through most retailers are running through in-store, 20% online. And even though there were some shifts, et cetera, through COVID, it's kind of rinded itself back up. So it's really important for brands to show up across every touch point. However, in saying that, there are some significant stats that suggest that people research online before they go in store. Some of those statistics are 60% plus. 60% of consumers are researching, or they're building out a shopping list, et cetera, before they transact in store. So it's important that brands are considering the consumer path to purchase and showing up where their audiences are shopping. And that's not just digital native. We're talking about, baby boomer audiences who were pushed online during COVID, and they have stayed there, and they're now using, apps and websites, et cetera, in a way that they may not have 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that I think is leading brands and businesses to have to think about showing up across multiple touch points.
Right. Okay.
I think sorry, Mal, I was just going to add on to that. Where we need to do our next sort of deeper dive into the research is to try and find out what people are researching prior to that purchase, right? Is it price? Is it looking for more product features? Is it availability? I don't know, range, size, color. There's so many different variables to this, right? Because I think if you're then going to utilize both those channels to try and make a better customer experience, you need to be using them relative to what stage of the decision process people are in. If people are researching whether a product is right for them, maybe it's more of a comparative advertising example. If you know they're researching price, direct them to where it's the lowest price, or show them value, or incentivize or something.
Okay, well then, to your point coming up, you've got some visuals about the best way to measure success or otherwise. Do you want to take us through that?
I'll give it a crack. I think all of the, how would I describe it? There's a lot of techniques, right, as that marketers bring to this, whether it's sales uplift or brand uplift. Market mix modeling is the new, technique of the day, which I don't profess to be an expert in at all. But I think what's happening and what's occurring in the market so much now is more discussion around ROAS, simply for the convenience of being able to say $1 in equals X amount in sales. Yeah. I don't dispute that that's a valuable way to start measuring and start, I guess, planning for retail media. What I would start to question around that is how much of that is new versus how much of that are you actually getting already just through your, just through the fact that you're ranged in a store.
Yeah, and it's habit.
And I think that's a fair enough question that marketers should be answering. And need to be connecting up with the trade parts of their organization to kind of understand, because there'd be nothing worse than saying we move 1 million units a month. Now we're investing in retail media as well. Yeah. And we're still moving 1 million units a month.
Right. And you've got a chart that shows that.
I think the challenge, I think the challenge though to that is that, the pace and the growth of retail media probably has moved faster than the ability for retail media networks to provide a level of attributable sales for each of their formats. Yep. And that's not an Australia issue. This is a global challenge that most retailers are facing. If you're based in the digital world, Amazon, for example, it's easier because all of your assets can be tracked. But if you have a bricks and mortar environment, it's very challenging to be able to say an aisle fin or a floor decal or a front of store screen attributed to X in terms of sales growth versus a social media asset or a bus back or a television commercial that somebody else may have seen. So it's a really, really tricky spot. I definitely think that the level of scrutiny and the level of focus that's being placed on reporting is needed because it would be reckless to swing large pools of budget or proportions of budget into something if you can't actually demonstrate the value that it's going to provide back to you. But at the same time, we have supported the growth of retail media networks, and we also need to give them the chance to catch up with the reporting.
Okay. You've got this.
For sure. But I also think we've got to do it in a responsible way that's not necessarily always unit based. Like, I don't think there's a lot of value at this stage of saying, I bought 20 screens across those stores with an average reach of and try to build this up from like a granular impression level. Yeah. I think a starting point might be to say, I had media weights running of approximately this over that particular seasonal period. Now, whether trade data is going to become so valuable to this, I can tell you from experience, the trade teams are accurate like within less than 1%.
Wow.
And they'll say, yeah, tomorrow we're going to do this. And the reason I know that is because this day last year we did this, but we were cycling for this event. So I'm going to factor that in. And they know it because they've got just, years and years and years of data to be able to forecast and model. Retail media is a completely new variable to that. So you could start from the perspective of any variance on what trade can definitively tell us is a cue to examine the effectiveness of retail media. So let's actually start up high and then start to break down, well, how much of that is in-store versus online? What's the comparative reach of each channel? What was the nature of our messaging? Or, was it product-driven promotion? Was it price? And then start to, I guess, dissect, rather than what media people have a history of doing, which is looking at one impression and trying to find 100 data points around that and then do the same with the next impression. Yeah. We're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, well then to this point about where sales are coming from, you've got this little diagram here that from business as usual all the way through. So do you want to take us through this?
Sure. Look, this is just an observation that I've kind of had, that there can somewhat be a flawed assumption that everything that you're doing in retail media is completely incremental to everything that has gone before. The reality is, though, if you're an established brand and you now have a sponsored product link in a search results page on a retailer, if someone's searching for Coca-Cola, just because that first spot is now a sponsored Coca-Cola link, it would be very hard without a smirk to say that ad is solely responsible for that purchase of Coca-Cola. So what I'm trying to understand, what I'm trying to encourage our clients to investigate is how much of that Coke was I going to sell, and how much new Coke am I selling as a result of that sponsored link? Because often the briefs that we are getting is, I have this much money, here is my target audience, and I want incrementality.
Okay, to your point.
And my question is, what kind of incrementality do you want?
Yeah. So you sort of explain it this way, how it can be different things.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on, I guess, the relative size, scale, popularity, awareness that a brand has. You know, let me pick on Coca-Cola because it's a great big example that everybody knows, right? Find me a new to brand customer for Coca-Cola. Well, we can have a Coke Pepsi debate over that one. New to category customers, that's probably not a massive source of incrementality for a soft drink brand where it's, you know, pretty much all consumers, right? But existing customers buying more of a chosen product. So it's incremental if my weekly shop is 1 liter of Coke, and as a result of advertising, it is now 1.5 liters, for example.
Yep.
It could be from a portfolio perspective that I'm gaining incrementality. So I buy my liter of normal Coke, and now every week I'm trying a smaller bottle of vanilla Coke or a different flavor variant or something like that.
Yep.
That's increasing my repertoire or my a purchase within that portfolio.
Yep.
So understanding all of these different levers for what actually constitutes incremental revenue or incremental sales is really important, because I think not only do those have different targeting parameters, I think they also have different messaging parameters around them as well. So I can give an example from a past life. When we divided our store network up for different targeting principles, we could have a brand that says, I'm going to target the stores where my product over indexes relative to the category. And that's going to be a position of me talking to my loyal audience. And then I'm going to have a different message where my product under indexes relative to the category. And that's where I'm going to encourage switch behavior. I might do some kind of pricing or value promotion to just encourage trial of my particular product.
But you've got to have the data first, and that's the key to this. Yeah.
You've got to have the data. You've got to have the flexibility. You've got to have the agility to create different messaging around this as well, rather than a one size fits all, you know, ad in a store.
So where do you see growth coming from in the industry then? Leah, your thought before I jump back.
Look, I think just to build on what Lockie said, Malcolm, like, it is really brand dependent. I think Coke is a great example, also a client. And I think Coke is a great example of where, you know, an incremental sale is a win. And, you know, a lot of marketing science, Ehrenberg Bass Institute will say that, you know, getting a +1 additional sale from your existing shoppers is the most cost efficient way to grow your market share. However, if you're a brand that's a category captain, if you're somebody who's got 60% of an aisle, 50% of an aisle, and your job is to help to grow a category, then you can't just rest on your laurels of a +1 buy. It's about bringing new people into that category. And so, you know, your media or your advertising plans should be reflective of what the objective is for your particular brand, whatever that might look like. One other thing I would probably challenge is probably not the right word, but one other thing I would suggest is that, you know, these formats can be super expensive, and often brands take a lens of, but my cost per acquisition or the cost of conversion is really high versus if I was to invest in other mass reach channels, throw everything into social, for example. But I think what we're going to see is a resurgence of the 4 Ps of marketing. Scary that Ritson says 80% of marketers can't list what those are. But I think what it does present is, you know, a need for product quality to be amazing, pricing to be perfect, because that then all contributes to a consumer's value experience or value exchange with a brand or with a product. And marketing is part of that process and part of that exchange. And when you actually think about it that way, the cost per acquisition starts to go down the longer that somebody purchases your brand or your product.
Yeah.
So it kind of is offset a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's something that we probably don't spend as much time talking about, because we like to measure within a snapshot of running a piece of media activity. But actually, when you start to look at the longitudinal effects of marketing and media on the way consumers engage and continue to purchase your brand or your product, it becomes relative.
And you've got to keep your finger on the pulse the whole time. So you've got an example then, Lachlan, of growth opportunities that you gave us just as a simple explanation.
Yeah, look, a personal story and a gratuitous self-promotion for cash rewards while I'm at it. We've got about 2.5 million or something members. They transact across about 2,500 merchants. So we've got some pretty rich first-party data on, lifestyle, not just purchases in one category, but purchases in multiple categories. And what starts to get interesting is where you look at the patterns of purchase in completely unrelated areas before something major. So without going too deep into my personal life here, we recently changed energy providers, right? Now, funnily enough, Cash Rewards does not have a target audience called energy lovers or something along those types of lines. But I would argue that the behavior that I undertook in the last few months, like buying yoga mats at Rebel and fish oil from Chemist Warehouse, sorry, overshare, they're just two examples of things I did in the months leading up to changing an energy provider. Now, I know that if I took all of our data of all the people who have switched energy providers, this week, I'm going to get some really interesting patterns about what they've done in the preceding months. That data is incredibly valuable to an advertiser like an Energy Australia or other high consideration categories like fintech, like insurance, where you only really care about car insurance when you get your renewal notice, right?
That's right.
But there would be certain cues through a customer's or a consumer's life that you might be able to start to use patterns to predict. If I want to get someone to change energy providers in November, I should talk to people who bought new furniture in June.
In June or something like that. Try and find the link.
That's probably a silly example, but you kind of get the picture.
I think the other thing, I'm sure that there's parts of the audience that are listening to this thinking, oh my gosh, here comes big brands with their predictive behavior and it becomes really scary. What Lockie's talking about is not one-to-one. People aren't, there's certainly no one sitting digging into your personal information, your search history, etc. But what, businesses are looking for are large trends and large predictors of behavior amongst audience
large
sets.
Behaviors,
yes.
Okay, so, but it is fascinating in stuff where you can do some linkage with your data, which isn't always obvious. But so what formats then of retail media are most popular? What's growing and why? The research suggests on-site display ads, and I'm assuming that's because people are searching and the ad is linked to that search. Would that be right, Lachlan?
Yeah, two things. One, it could be linked to the search. Secondly, it could be linked to other activity that particular customer has undertaken during that session. Thirdly, it could be linked to much richer CRM data. So we know that particular person has invested in, these categories. We're going to show them ads about those categories as well.
I think the build on that is, these formats, particularly on-site display formats, allow you to take your product outside of your core aisle and put it into another aisle. So, for example, I used to work in the world of bread, and our target audience was parents of primary school aged children. Kids are pretty active these days, and mums and dads go through a lot of nappy sand. So it actually makes loads of sense to take a bread ad that's designed for lunch boxes and sandwiches and put that in alongside laundry soak, because there's probably some basket adjacencies between those two categories. Similarly, Barocca, for example, as a product is typically drunk by, certain audiences the morning after, festivities. However, it's also a way to, revitalize. So putting that next to the breakfast occasion, for example, when lots of people, it makes sense to take your product outside of your core aisle and put it somewhere else. And these formats allow you to have that level of contextual relevancy, which, you know, in the physical environment is very hard to do because that space is, and that inventory is at a premium. You know, the laundry detergents in a grocery store aren't going to give up their space for a bread ad to sit there when there's only 4 aisle fins in that entire aisle, versus in the digital landscape where you have much more flexibility and larger pools of ad inventory.
Yeah, it's good insight.
I think, again, coming from the selling of retail media ads, I agree with the intention behind that. What I've found, though, in consumer research, and particularly working like with CX teams on how many ads are too many ads and how much targeting we want to allow, a former colleague said to me, we don't want to do anything that's going to unnecessarily surprise a customer. Delight them by all means, but surprise them. And I think the key word in all of this is customer. Traditional media businesses have audiences. Retail media businesses have customers.
Yeah, good insight.
If you show them the wrong ads, if you show them too many, if you show them at a point where they're just trying to buy something and get back to life, you lose a customer, and then they go to a competitor, and chances are they never come back. So you're losing a lifetime of transactions as well as what you would have made in retail media. So striking the right balance between accompanying the consumer journey with relevant advertising, but not overdoing it, is really the kind of sweet spot that we need to hit.
But I do think retailers live and breathe by their customers, and so they do a very, very good job at also playing the voice of customer. And I think brands also, I mean, ultimately, we want to drive a sale. We want somebody to want to engage with our products, and so there is probably a level of consumer centricity in this kind of marketing that doesn't exist in other marketing because of what Lockie's just mentioned. You know, really putting the customer first.
Okay, well, there's obviously various, or the quality varies enormously across different suppliers and retailers. Leah, how do you ensure you get good quality without wastage? Because you're obviously the one buying it for lots of clients.
Yeah, it's super complex, and it really depends on the media network that you're working with and the way that they've got their, you know, trading relationships set up. And when I talk trading relationships, I'm talking about how they, you know, bring or how they serve their advertising into the market, how they make their data accessible. I think the role that we play is making sure that retail media networks are competitive in the media environment to their counterparts. So the cost of an out-of-store screen is relative to the cost of out-of-store screens if we were purchasing through a traditional media partner, that the cost to ad serve a programmatic piece of content makes sense and is in line with the market rates that we would expect to see if we were working through a DSP, for example. So those are the kinds of, I guess, layers and I guess a level of scrutiny that we put on plans when we work with our clients. However, there are often relationships and jobs to be done outside of core media metrics that also dictate an investment strategy. And so that also comes into play when we're working with clients in terms of the application of their budgets.
Okay. All right. Interesting. And to your point earlier about how fast it's growing, I found this chart only last week. And US retail media has been revised in terms of its forecast spend after only 1 quarter of the year. So it's actually increased. You can see that on the bottom there was the original forecast in Q1. And the Q2 forecast has it already increasing by quite an amount for a short period of time. What are your thoughts on reasons why for that? Nothing to do with the election, I'm assuming, but any thoughts from either of you? Lachie, do you want to go first?
I was just going to say, not directly related to the election, but I don't think forecasts and polls from the US are really giving us a great lens on what's actually going to happen at the moment anyway. Yeah. Look, I think that type of information probably speaks to the points that, you know, both Leah and I have been advocating for today, is that advertisers are really finding and extracting great value out of retail media. So, you know, any investment that's generating above and beyond what they're finding from other channels is just going to result in an immediate shift of budget. And this is probably where you're probably going to get these types of lifts continually in retail media, because I think it's easy to shift money from a from a media plan into retail media than it is to change your trade budgets, which are laid down way longer in advance and have different commitments related to, ranging and wholesale prices and distribution and, the sorts of things that don't turn on a dime. But buying some more ads and adding another campaign or more products to a campaign, there's much more flexibility in that. So I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to see the need to reforecast these types of things.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Now, one of the things I noticed in your membership, you've got Microsoft, and a lot of people would wonder, why is Microsoft a retail media channel? Do you want to just expand on that, Lachlan, on what they have to offer, for example?
Sure. Well, at the risk of being trite, Microsoft actually bought a retail media business. So they entered the market probably about 4 years ago after an acquisition of a company called Promote IQ, which specialized in on-site advertising, so sponsored product links and display advertising. There's a very effective tie-in from what Promote IQ is doing on-site into Microsoft's established programmatic media network through their another acquisition called Xandr. For those not familiar with Xandr, programmatic platform initially underpinned the Netflix advertising offering. Right. So you could connect together the first-party data that you were getting as a retailer to utilizing that through Xandr as a programmatic play, and then into things like connected TV, BVOD, et cetera, wherever Microsoft had those connections. Microsoft's business model has changed a little bit more in sort of recent months to focus much more on that off-network play, so utilizing retailer data in third-party environments. But keep in mind, Microsoft does have its own rich media network as well through MSN Network, Outlook, Xbox Network, etc. So there's a lot of audience using Microsoft properties. Now there's a connection to first-party data to better target segments within that audience.
Right. Okay. Well, then where does email, SMS, the traditional catalogs, loyalty programs, where do they fit in the mix these days? Are they part of this, or are they still part of what you might call shopper media? Leah?
Catalogs are really not covered by retail media networks, at least in Australia. However, they still play a huge role in the total media mix, particularly amongst CPG clients. Given the necessity for good quality first-party data that underpins most retail media networks, there is still a huge role for email, less so on SMS, but probably for email still. If you're a retailer that has, thousands of products in the store, bringing promotions to life, bringing new products to life through any touch point, still, it's still a mission critical. So there's definitely still a utilization of email. From my perspective, I think what needs to be done to see this expand even more is the consideration around the way that email, for example, is priced, because it's often bought on a data pool. So you think that you're going to reach 500,000 people, but if your open rate sits at 27% and your click-through rate sits at 0.05% of that 27%, it becomes a very expensive buy-in. So there's probably, as more and more businesses and brands come into this, I think the demand and or the pushback is going to help to reset some of the pricing that sits in and around some of these formats.
Okay. And you got some thoughts, I know.
From my perspective, Mal, I adore email and I'm fond of SMS because, these are boost mechanics, right? Like I talked about incrementality before. The value that email and any kind of push type of notification generates is you're possibly getting your customers out of their standard cycle.
Yes.
So that's advantageous for a brand who wants to not let people shop on habit and wants to put an offer in front of them, 2 days before they just go and pick the usual stuff off the shelf. Yep. So I can really see the value of those channels, for that incremental lift. Look, Leah's right about the dynamics of this, and what gets more and more challenging with email is, our browsers and our operating systems, particularly anything mobile, actually blocking us even measuring how many open rates and that sort of thing we're getting from email. So a channel that used to be so wholly accountable now has this kind of black spot in data that makes it a lot harder to measure. I think the unit currencies for email are always going to be a challenge as well. Soulless emails from a retailer, I'm not so mad on, because that's a lot of real estate to give to one single brand. So unless it's pinpoint targeted, it can be it's not necessarily a great consumer experience. So it has the potential to be game changing if you're looking for those uplifts, but there's just a lot of planning that needs to go into those particular channels.
So in saying that, Locke, you can imagine in a aisle like the oral care aisle with a new entrant like High Smile coming in, which is a business that has built itself, $1 billion business, built itself through direct to consumer. It's now stepping into the bricks and mortar space and being ranged through traditional retail routes. That is the kind of brand, or that is the kind of opportunity for a brand to tap into Soulless email, because it has a large enough existing customer base who can then also now purchase without having to wait for delivery. They can literally walk in store and replace their toothpaste or their toothbrush heads. So they're probably great examples of where things like Soulless email works. It's not going to be for everybody, certainly not, if you're bringing out, a new SKU of a new flavor of chips or, wraps or chocolate, for example.
Really?
But there are always use cases for any media format. You just need to make sure that the way you're planning takes into account your job to be done.
Yeah.
Well, herein is the challenge, right? Because I can envisage that brand coming from an agency, and then if I looked at the way our product is set up, I would say that's an edge case. Are we prepared to invest in the resource to build something specific? What's going to be the upside for us if that's 1 out of 100 brands? So that's where it really gets a lot harder to try and systematize some of these types of executions. Because you know what it's like. We've got a brand that has these specific audience needs and this and this and this, and you go, well, we've got a product portfolio of media product.
Yeah.
Could you start with picking one of those first, and then if there's the capacity to customize, we'll just look at the unit economics of doing so.
I think this is where agency planning comes to its fore. And I'm not saying this because I work in an agency. I would have said this 12 months ago, working in a brand side role. Agencies have a very good way of being discerning of the right formats that are going to work to deliver the job to be done, as opposed to the way that often retail media is planned when it's planned by the retailers, because they have a vested interest to try and do a 360-degree campaign with every single plan that they send back to a brand. So I think, this is where agencies can really play that role of being discerning about the right format based off the objective on a brief.
Yeah, absolutely. But retail media, we talked about this off camera before, Leah, but any retailer has a more vested interest to scoop up more of the overall budget, even more so than traditional media owners do, right? They're not all necessarily at the evolutionary stage where they can do successful upfronts the way that traditional media does. So they're fighting for every single dollar on every single schedule. The benefit that they have is the leverage of their trade data to know exactly how important that brand is to them, what share of category that brand has, how much they're prepared to invest to get more or less, or keep up to that trade commitment as well.
You're right, Locke, but those are really they often can become one-sided conversations, or brands feel uncomfortable about having those conversations because they have the threat of ranging or commercial deals hanging over their heads, and so there is almost a sentiment of necessity to engage in those conversations. Certainly coming into an agency role, we can play a more agnostic point of view in that conversation. Our vested interest is to make sure that our clients and our customers are achieving their own objectives, and in the media plans and the application of budgets in alongside that are done in a way that's going to achieve an overall objective as opposed to a single vested interest.
Okay, well, I'm sure that one could go on for a while between you, but now my personal flex here, having written one of the world's first books on email marketing, which I think was 26 years ago now, the beauty of the channel is you can test it. You can test a solo, and if it works, if not, you make your change. That's the beauty of it, and you can roll out and test all sorts of things. But in case you're wondering the marvels of technology, I've got an iPad in front of me, and I've got a couple of audience questions, which I'll share with you. This one's probably more for Leah. Should advertisers go direct or via an agency when they're looking to go to retail media?
Look, I mean, selfishly, I'm going to say, come to an agency, come speak to me. Look, not every single brand, that's not going to work for every single brand. I think we need to be realistic about it. You know, some brands and some businesses, especially ones that are growing, have really, really smart people operating within the business, and they're very comfortable having, you know, very, very forthright conversations with all of their partners, whether it be, you know, manufacturers, logistics, or their media partners. So it's entirely up to the brand itself. I think if you're a business that's sitting on, you know, huge spends across above the line and below the line, finding a way to create greater connectivity is really, really important to get efficiencies and effectiveness of your total media investments. And I believe that agencies can really play a role in helping to support delivering against that.
Lockie, anything alternate to that? Or
look, I sort of agree with Leah on that. I think it's very circumstantial, and I think it's going to very much depend from a pure retail media perspective. I think it's going to very much depend on the distribution that brand has. Can an agency help a brand get into new retailers?
and use them.
I'd say it's probably more a trade thing, and then the agency comes in at the next level to then say maybe look at optimizing that spend between multiple retailers. So again, just a very circumstantial thing.
Okay, and just one quickly, because you did touch on it earlier, both about the Commonwealth Bank announcing its retail media offering. How do you think customers would react to knowing that their data is being sold for profit as against getting a discount on their mortgage?
I don't know that it's as linear. Let me jump in. I don't know if it's as linear as that. And I think what CommBank are aiming to do is to provide a greater consumer experience or customer experience to their customers, as opposed to, you know, driving profitability is like the number one thing that's underpinning their launch of their owned media network. You know, the financial institutions in Australia have some of the most heavily scrutinized and monitored and managed privacy frameworks around the use of people's personal information. And they certainly aren't making that available to the market, nor are they using it for their own gains in a way that's reckless. So, you know, I think it's probably misguided to think that that's what's underpinning the delivery of the CommBank.
I think we're just all a bit cynical about banks, that's all.
Fully appreciate that, but I think they're like two very, very different sides.
You're absolutely right, but I had to feed the question. So look, just conscious of time. So I want to say thank you both for fascinating insights today. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, and maybe we will over lunch shortly, but I suspect both of you are going to have busier 2025s and 2024s somehow. So thank you very much for coming along. Really appreciate your input.
Thanks to you, Mal, and thanks to your audience for making a series like this happen.
Well, if the audience does want to learn more, both of you have good resources. Obviously, the IAB has great resources. Group M does. So if you visit their websites, and if you want to save some money, go to Cashback and sign up. So you can get access to lots of free resources there, or if you join up with IAB, you can get stuff at even more detail. So that's a wrap, folks, on the first season of the Big Marketing Show. Thank you for your ongoing support. Next season is obviously going to be bigger. So keep an eye on our website and our social channels, because there'll be highlights from this year and announcements for season 2. I trust you all have a fabulous festive season, and I look forward to seeing you again here in 2025 on the virtual stage of the Big Marketing Show. Thank you.